All right, welcome to the Bryce Eddy Show. So today my guest is Dr. Greg Stewart, and he's written a couple of books. We're going to talk about him here, and I'm excited to have this conversation. Welcome to the show, Dr. Greg Stewart. How are you, sir?
Excellent. And of course, the pleasure is all mine.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, it's good. Look, I've been going through some sort of, crazy things in my life right now, and it's always good to talk to somebody who's got some counseling background. So
Yep.
anyway, I'm looking forward to talking with you and chatting through and seeing how you could help people in need. And let's talk about these books. So they're both, I mean, both starting out from the same premise, but applying to different things. And let's start there.
All right. So let me begin with, if I may, with just kind of like my story because it leads right into the book. So I'll start off at an early age, but don't worry, it'll go quick. So I became a Christian, and like a lot of us, in junior church back in the 70s. And then my parents could go to church, which meant I could go to church. And I did the party hardy teen years, suffered the consequences from those years, and then recommitted my life to Christ. And then eventually landed back at the very same church that I got saved as a kid. So during that process, I was actually working as a produce manager at a grocery store, and I felt called into the ministry. So that led to me talking to the pastors, going on a short-term missions trip in 1993, spending the summer in Guyana, South America, came back, went to a Bible Institute, and so on. So when I was doing my internship at the church, the senior pastor at the time asked me to be the youth pastor at the church, the very same church. So I actually ended up being a pastor at the church. I got saved as a kid for 15 years. So youth, associate, then senior is a great experience. So first, it's when it was back in the day in the early 90s where there was a bunch of us that had like 160 credit hours but no degree. So they started forming these adult continuing education programs where you take a class one night a week and then get the bachelor's degree and then move on. So the degree they offered was in organizational leadership. So cool. Took it, liked the material, but my focus was to get to seminary and, start diving into the ministry. But so I got that. And then my first semester of seminary of my Master of Divinity, the Greek, Hebrew theology stuff, I took philosophy of counseling. And then my eyes were opened up for two reasons. One is because I saw how powerful it could be used in ministry. But secondly, kind of like I realized how many issues I had, right? So from there, I mapped out a dual master's degree. So I got my Master of Divinity in 3 years in the year 2000, then went on to get my MA in counseling. So that was a defining moment for sure, getting that in that philosophy of counseling. And in between the two degrees, I had another defining moment where I was an associate pastor at this time. And I was on vacation. I came across the book Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman and read that book and changed everything. Matter of fact, that became the premise for everything I even do today. Secondly, at that same time, I started teaching as an adjunct professor for my alma mater in all the organizational leadership courses I took, and then absolutely fell in love with leadership. And number three, I happened to be underneath a pastor that, he loved the Lord, read the word. There was nothing, but he just had some emotional stuff that had some ramifications. We had a falling out. So there was during a season, like a bit of a midlife or a little crisis, because I was like, what's going on here? So then he left, I became the senior pastor, and then I started my PhD at Regent University in Virginia. And so my PhD in counseling, but I did my dissertation for my PhD on the relationship of emotional intelligence with job satisfaction and organizational commitment. So after I graduated from there was a guy in our church who he was the VP of HR at a large medical company in the area in Michigan. And that's where I kind of cut my organizational development teeth and executive coaching. And it was a phenomenal experience. So I wrapped up the church, had a great experience, and we moved to Texas in 2012. And for 3 years, I worked for a assessments company where I flew around the country. They did benchmarking for top performers and organizations, and they had leadership 360s. And I loved it. Flew all over the country, did leadership seminars and executive coaching. And then eventually the company got bought out, and about 80% of us got laid off. And I always like to joke, man, if you've never been laid off, you got to try it. It's quite the incredible experience. So over time, I eventually landed as a director of a residential treatment center, went back to the counseling thing and worked with troubled teens. And that's kind of where I've refined my expertise as far as trauma. All that being said, that's kind of like my background, but I like sharing that story because it's so weird. It's very like, I was a pastor, counselor, organizational consultant. That's kind of what led to this whole thing. But Even with all the successes and all those wonderful letters behind my name, what needs to be told is in 2011, after I left my church, my marriage wasn't doing well, and I ended up having an emotional affair. We didn't do anything physically; it was just an emotional attachment, obviously not appropriate. And I was just blown away. Like, I was a pastor and a marriage counselor, and kind of like, how did this happen? So, Bryce, basically, it turned into this 10-year healing process for me, where I did a deep dive into Greg, because I got to figure this out. And now I'm on the other side of it. And, I can say I'm healed. I'm stronger now than I've ever been. That even though I went through divorce, my marriage didn't recover from it. I wrote a book on marriage counseling, but I feel my marriage counseling expertise has increased tenfold because I did that deep dive. And so that's kind of like the premise for both books. The first one, I had to do a deep dive, unlock the inner strength behind your negative emotions. I had to do a deep dive into that, my insecurities, which then turn into like couples, like, we're exposed in marriage. We have a lot of emotions. We have to walk into those negative emotions instead of staying away from them. So as fast as I could, just a brief introduction that kind of led to, both of these books.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I mean, listen, I'm in full disclosure, and some of my audience knows this because some of my friends, I'm going through a rough experience along those lines right now myself. Some some of my own doing and having to navigate those waters right now. And of course, you can be super transparent with friends and all of that, but there's a lot of people that don't care, right? And as to how you got there, or what you've been going through, and all of that. So I mean, it's a great time to be talking to you, and I'm excited about your work, and sought you out partly because of that. And it's great to be able to have these transparent conversations. So
Right.
yeah, so let's talk about both of the books, and let's dive into it in detail, and
Mhm.
what particularly you have in that second book.
Okay, so this is how I kind of began in the first book. So I set it up where I talk about that everything we do is trying to achieve an emotional goal, right? So not to be too psychobabblish, but it's true. Like I was thirsty, so I don't want to feel thirsty, so I take a drink of water. If I feel hungry, I eat, and so on. I call those micro emotional goals.
Right.
But the micro emotional goals, but off to the side, are our macro emotional goals, which is basically, what are we all doing? We're trying to maximize our quality of life, every human being ever, and maximizing our quality of life, in standard of living, and living our values and fulfilling destiny, calling, and purpose, right? The emotional goals are good. So, first thing is recognizing and kind of framing it that with anything we do, like behaviorally or action wise, we're actually trying to achieve emotional goals. But then we have to separate the emotional goal from the path that we take to achieve it. Those paths have to be assessed by what I use all the way through both books is rational, healthy, wise, and right, like RHWR. Is it rational, healthy, wise, or right? So let's say, for instance, I use the example of, if I have a lot of stress and my emotional goal is to decrease that stress, my pathway to do it is to drink alcohol. Well, it achieves the goal, but it's not healthy, right?
Right.
So we have to assess the pathway we're taking to achieve the emotional goal. That's one. Secondly, is when our emotional goals are blocked, right? We have a lot of negative emotions, like flipping over to the couples book, like a husband's main emotional goal is significance, right? We're going to feel significant and successful. The woman's main emotional goal is security. So when those goals are blocked, obviously we have negative emotions. So I say, okay, picture behind us, each of us is the house of our heart. Okay. And we're on the front yard guarding the house of our heart. And before us are all the people and different things that are causing negative emotions. And we feel like we have to guard our heart from those things. Right. Which is fine, because somebody might, like, you might call me a name like, Dr. Stewart, you're an idiot. Right. So it might be valid. I might be upset with you, and that's valid. But here's the issue, that while I might be valid and need to address that with you, put everything on a scale of 1 to 10. In that, how big of a deal is that you said that? Well, it's a 1, but I'm at emotion, because I say emotion is energy. I'm at a 6, 7, or 8. So even though I only need like a 1 level of energy to address it with you, I'm at a 6, 7, or 8. And that's what I call the inflation. And what I found with people is that the inflation, even though I might need to address you legitimate, the inflation of my negative emotions, that 6, 7, or 8, it's not Bryce's issue, it's Greg's issue. So I have 3 tenets for emotions. Emotion is energy. And then number 2, have the right type of emotion. Like instead of saying anger, it's actually a result of fear. So we have to label it correctly. And that's where our pathway is to healing. And then the right amount. And that's what I'm talking about. So 1 to 10, how big of a deal is it? How much emotional energy? And then number 3 is when you have the inflation, the principle is that all negative emotion is exposing something in me, right? What is very human of us is when we have negative emotions, we're focusing on the external things that are causing it, and we're burning all the emotional energy on what we don't have control over. So the premise is to take back the power and control from the environment and take control back. Not, we should be influenced by our environment, but not power and control. The way we do that is go into that inflation. So I walk into the house of my heart where I walk into those negative emotions. I don't avoid them. I don't make you responsible for my negative emotions. I walk into them to address them, right? So I walk into the house of my heart and I say, you got to put down the microscope of analyzing everybody else and pick up the mirror on this journey. Because I can say on the other side, I've never been more secure and confident, at peace, and fully alive. So it's a tough process, but we have to do it. So don't let yourself off the hook walking into the negative emotions. So let's say in the house of our heart, I deal with the negative emotions of insecurity, anxiety, fear, worry, anger, and depression, like the common ones. So the first room's insecurity, and then anxiety's in the kitchen, fears in the hallway, crouched down, worries looking out the front window, anger's in the bedroom, and then depression is in the bed, right? So when you walk into those negative emotions, the first thing I find, there's 3 reasons for the inflation. The most common reason that I have an inflation, like I'm at a 6, 7, or 8 when it's only 1, is because we believe a lie about it, a lie about ourselves. I might believe a lie about you that he meant to do it. And right. So we have to delete lies when it comes to spirituality, that, Satan has one tool. He doesn't have a toolbox. He has a holster, right? And that is a lie. And those lies come in 3 forms: me, he, we, right? So he's going to tell me lies about myself, lies about God, lies about a relationship is a major source. But we can just believe a lie like, I'll never get a job. That's like a psychological lie, but there's still lies. So the first thing is we have to replace the lies with the truth. That's number 1. Secondly has to do with the room insecurity. So I say that, Bryce, so much power is in that room alone. So I tell a story in the book that I'm from Michigan originally, so go blue. And I worked at a hamburger joint like a lot of us did when we were kids. And believe it or not, brother, I was a super sarcastic teenage boy, but as you can tell, I've matured, right? You don't see that anymore, right? I'm a mature man. But back then I was super sarcastic. So I was teasing this girl so bad one time, I made her cry. Don't judge me. And as she's walking away crying, I yell out, "You wouldn't get so ticked off if it wasn't true." But it was I remember the moment, Bryce, because I stopped and I said, oh my gosh, Greg. So every time somebody cuts you down and upsets you and trash talks you or whatever, I started going through my mind, like, it's all true. Like, we humans don't use like complete like lies. Like, hey, Bryce, why don't you put some meat on those bones? And you're like, what? Right. So because if it's not true, it doesn't work. So what I started to realize is that insecurity is what? Insecurity is something I don't like about myself, right? But
Right.
that's not the issue. The issue is I don't want somebody else pointing it out. And
Right.
I get defensive. So that's one, is we have to own it. Or it could be like, it's true, but I don't want to own it. Or it's not true, but I believe it to be true, like just an insult or something, right? So insecurity is a big one. But in that room, there's a door. And the door goes into the basement. And in the basement is the machine of identity, value, and worth. So whenever you hear the second reason for the inflation is when we take things personally, it's anything that negative that happens, we take it personally, which means it's impacting my value and worth when it shouldn't. And I get inflated, right? A lot of times it's when it comes to pursuit, like, I need you to pursue or validate me. And like in our culture, it's huge. I need you to pursue or validate me because I have a vacuum and I can't do it myself. So I need you to. And if you don't, I'm offended. Right. So I have a whole chapter on dealing with that identity, value, and worth. And over off in the corner of the basement is the cellar door of trauma, big T or little T trauma. Few of us have been through like big T trauma, but most have been through little T trauma, just a difficult event, which means what? When I'm going about my day, what happens is my mental model goes, oh no, Greg, here we go again. And it scoops up the emotion from that event and plops it right here. And you see that a lot in marriage. Bad relationships previously scoops that emotion and plops it right on your current partner. Right. So those are the three reasons for the inflation. And then so from there, that's our pathway into that inflation, because the inflation's not anybody's responsibility but my own. So that's where the healing takes place. So in both books, that's kind of like the premise by which that's walking into our negative emotions and not avoiding them, because that's where the healing takes place.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I mean, very astute as an observation, because I mean, so much of I mean, even, in my own life, I've spent so much time avoiding things, right? Avoiding dealing with, low T, or small
Yeah.
T trauma, or, dealing with insecurities, or, actually addressing things. And even though, I manage imagine myself as more self-aware than most. Yeah, I think that we characteristically, go about, trying not to confront those ugly feelings or ugly emotions, or, avoiding stuff that we should be dealing with openly, and in a, collaborative community way.
Right. When it said, like, confess your sins to one another kind of thing.
Yeah.
And honestly, when it comes to, I say that every relationship, again, back to couples and even individual, every relationship on earth ever is about safety and pursuit. So when I talk about safety, like in the Christian community, I lead a small group, and I pound this, that every relationship is about safety and pursuit. So we have to practice safety here, because why? I mean, we've all heard the stories of, we could be in a small group for a couple of years and with Jim and Susie, then suddenly we find out Jim and Susie are getting divorced, and we had no idea. I mean, that is not the way the Lord set this up. So is it they didn't feel safe? Like, in order to be truly transparent, or in marriages, like, safety has to do with, am I safe with you? And we want to be safe, but we're not. But then there's pursuit of, I'm going to pour into you because you're worth it to me. And that pursuit, actually, it's kind of like the cycle. That pursuit of you makes you feel like this identity thing, where it makes you feel that you are worth something and that I'm committed to you. So if you feel pursued by people, then you feel more safe with them.
Right.
Right. So it's that paradigm, but it's
Yeah,
tough.
that's an interesting perspective, because, I mean, I've found, and this has led to some of my own challenges. And again, reason, not an excuse, but, it's hard within Christian community sometimes to feel that sense of, yeah, hey, I can really, unload,
Yeah.
on my brothers, some of these burdens and some of these things that I'm, feeling or facing. Or, in that small group, yeah, we can be, safe to be, honest and transparent about the things that we're doing. At the same time, I mean, you don't want to be the person that is also sitting around, seeming to, complain or nitpick about your partner, or, those sort of things. And so it's, it's kind of a difficult thing to know how to navigate.
Yeah. And I would say that, like, that's an excellent point, because you don't want to make the small group about you or whatever the case is. So I say that when we talk about, like, being transparent, and, I hate the word vulnerable, because I mean, leadership, but it's not vulnerable. It's being, let's frame it as teachable. Because I talk about that in chapter 2, that, like, our mental models are from DNA, life experiences, and choices, and it's information and formulas. And a long time ago, I am okay with saying my mental model, even today, is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I don't trust it. Right. So what I'm doing is and I have a blind areas. So it's not about being vulnerable and sharing dirty laundry, because a lot of the stuff that I am sharing, I mean, I have all the resources and ability to not do it. So it's not about, like, my struggle. So being teachable means that, look, I want to be thrown to the carpet on this and have it addressed, because I should be doing better than I am. Right.
Mhm.
Secondly, it's either, like, accountability in the sense of its current, meaning I'm doing or not doing something and I need to, but also the teachability has to do with, listen, I'm walking into a season, and nothing's wrong. I'm gonna have a lot of emotions, but I'm not gonna dump them here. But but I'm vulnerable right now in the sense of Satan's going to be after me.
Right.
So this is what's going on in my life. I mean, again, I'm not in sin now, but I want to keep it that way.
Right.
So you're basically being transparent, not just like, hey, this is all the junk I'm doing, but it is, I need community help because I'm in spiritual war. That's where prayer comes in. But also, I want to be held accountable and be asked the tough questions to ensure that I walk through this refiner's fire process in a healthy way. When we kind of frame it that way, as far as like, then it changes the context where I'm not exposing my failure or making it about me, or just I'm doing it the right way, because that's, I think, the Christian community of saying I need prayer and I need accountability to ensure that I'm protected. That's what I think the Lord set up specifically.
Yeah, I think so. And in many of the churches, it's tough because we tend to shoot our wounded,
Mhm.
and that's an unfortunate thing about a lot of the way the Christian church and Christian community has dealt with a lot of things is with a lot of judgment and pride towards other people. Oh, I'm glad I'm not that person, and I
Yeah,
think
and I experienced that, of
that's a
course, like
challenge.
when I went through the emotional affair. I mean, good night. I mean, it was a both and. I was actually surprised that, fewer people came alongside me. Other people did a great job.
Right.
But number one is that it's amazing. It's amazing how immature we find out our maturity level when we're tested. Like I'm writing my third book, IQ for Leaders, right now. And it's our leadership is tested not when things are going well, when things aren't going well. Same
Right.
thing with our spirituality, same thing with our maturity, our emotional intelligence. And it is surprising that the Christian community, how well they just don't know, they don't even know how to do this thing. Right. So how do I walk through? And there's a process for doing it, right? And I talk about like how to recover from an affair in my appendix in the couples book, because this is how I think biblically we go through this process of laying it out. So it's not because we just focus on the action, like, okay, did you sin, and confess it and don't do it anymore, right? And if you keep doing it, where the case is, or we look at I can't believe you did that. Like Greg had an emotional affair, right? So then I'm categorized. But I mean, again, we're human and there's failing, but that doesn't alleviate me of the responsibility to do what I need to do and seek out that, right?
Right.
So I went to a church, down here is a wonderful church. And this was an amazing story. I actually just thought about this. I haven't thought about this in a long time. And I was going through a divorce. I met with a pastor at one of the churches, and he said, Greg, probably not wise to be a part of a small group now, because, you're going through divorce and you shouldn't be going through divorce, and you don't want to make it all about you. And I was like, okay, I mean, I understand, right? I don't want to make it about me, but it was rare, but it was beautiful. He called me up. I don't know when it was, sometime later, week, 2 weeks. And he says, Greg, I want to apologize to you. I'm I'm wrong. If there's anybody that needs to be part of a small group, it's you. And I'm asking for your forgiveness. And that was so beautiful, because
Yeah, that's great.
he, right, and again, we had those moments, but nevertheless, I submitted to him, but I still needed to seek it out, because which I did in other avenues of spiritual accountability and stuff, right? But it's tough, but we've got to press forward and walk into it and figure this stuff out anyway.
Yeah, amen. I mean, the only way out of those sort of things is through, and there is a
It's
process,
true.
and yeah, and there is a biblical model for restoration or reconciliation or whatever's
Exactly.
possible under those things, and yeah, it's a tough road
Mhm.
ahead.
Yeah. And the Lord, my next book after IQ for Leaders is going to be how to feel forgiven. Right. So that's, like you just said, the restoration process. We can be like, the Lord forgives us, but then there is, how do I be restored? And that has to do with godly sorrow and worldly sorrow. But anyway, so there's a plan and a process. So, what, like, for the listeners, whatever negative emotion you experience, whether you're going through a very difficult season or when you're experiencing, like I say, okay, what do you do? I said the first thing, which you don't need to work at all, is when you experience any negative emotions, there's your cue. And we all know when we're experiencing those. So the first thing you assess is is my emotional energy much greater than the situation requires? Right? Which a lot of times it is. So if that's the case, you got to deal with that inflation. And then inflation is going to come in one of these three areas. So that's just a very, very quick ways. I have negative emotions. It's too much. So something is being exposed in me. I've got to figure that out. And there's many paths to do that. So that's why I say, as far as the applicational piece, if we do that, that sets us on the journey. Because I remember one time I was pacing in my house and I would not let myself off the hook. I was saying, okay, Greg, apply it. What is being exposed in you? So why are you so upset? When I ask that question, I immediately start thinking about what the person did upset me. I'm like, no, Greg, nope. But what they did was wrong, right? But why are you so upset? And Bryce, I would not let myself off the hook, and I kept digging and digging. It ended up, when I got down to the root, it was envy, that they were experiencing things that I wanted to experience, and like they weren't grateful for it, or I just wasn't experiencing it. And when they offended me over here, the inflation came from the envy. And a lot of us don't like think about envy, but I was surprised what the Lord revealed to me, but I would not let myself off the hook because I realized that something is being exposed to me. And when we do that, man, the Spirit is powerful and beautiful. And again, it's a journey and stuff, but it is so, so gracious when we have that contrite heart and we don't blame others and we go to the Lord. And I would say to him, what do you want to say to me about this topic? Right? I'm not going to process Bryce upset me. I got it. But what do you want to say to me about why am I so upset? Why is this hurting me so much? Why am I so insecure? Speak to me on this. And, being open to do that and hearing what the Lord has to say to us is powerful. But again, it hurts and we don't want to face it because again, it's exposure. But it's my value and worth is not set on my failures. My value and worth is set on my identity. And I always tell believers that when it comes to my identity and worth and process of gaining that, it's what's the one thing the Lord does not call us anymore in the New Testament? Sinners, right? Now, Paul says he's the chief of sinners, and James says you don't mind your sinners. But what does he call us? He calls us saints. And my brothers and sisters in Catholic, like I'm already a saint. I don't need to do 2 miracles. Like I'm a saint. I'm a priest. I'm a king. And first love, fiance, friend. What God is saying to us is we don't have to work to become something. That's every other religion. It's God is saying to us when I make you alive again by the Spirit, you are saint, priest, king. So the issue isn't to work and strive to become this thing. You already are this thing. So what I'm trying to teach you is how to live it out now. It's how to live out your identity. So that's why he says when Romans 7 is no longer I who do it, it's a sin living in me. Now I can't go to my wife and say, hey, wasn't me, honey, it was a sin living in me. She's like, oh. But it's as far as identity, it's not me. And now that Greg needs to die because he's causing problems. He's selfish. He's whatever. But my identity is saint, priest, king. So that's one. That's why he says that I need to put to death Romans 6, that person. But also what God is saying is you are already this thing. So this is your identity. That's the anomaly. That's the outside. That's why he tells us to abide. Now, he does say, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, but that's to non-believers. Once you're a believer, the command is to abide, right? That's the command. It's not become Amen. Or do, it's abide and attach to me. And I'm going to teach you how to live out your priesthood, your kingship, your being a saint. And just that one shift of I already am that. And like, because again, it feels weird to see yourself as that, but that's the whole point. So you live out what you already are, and it's huge, but we just focus so much on being identified by the sin. When the Lord says, do not judge lest you be judged. But yet in 1 Corinthians 5, the apostle Paul says, I've already judged you in this matter. What's the difference? Matthew 7 judging is a pharisaical judging is you are defined by your sin. That's your identity with no hope of restoration.
Right.
1 Corinthians 5, I'm going to judge you in this matter. Look, what you're doing is wrong, but let's work on restoration. This is not who you are. There's your difference, because everybody says, do not judge. Well, okay, what judging are you talking about? Because I'm not going to identify you by your sin, and there's hope for restoration. So I'm doing the right judging, but I am going to evaluate. I'm going to speak grace and truth. Because I say in the book that grace and empathy without truth and boundaries is enablement. But truth and boundaries without grace and empathy is toxic. Jesus came full of both. And in every difficult conversation, what have you, you need to make statements that speak both grace and truth. Otherwise we err. But both must be spoken, right?
Amen.
The Lord is with us,
Amen.
grace and truth.
Amen.
So, sorry, I'm sermonizing, so I apologize.
No, I loved it. I loved it. Great. Again, great personal timing for me on all this. So it's wonderful. How do we get your book? Where do we get it? I know you sent me a copy, but
Yep.
where do we find it?
So everything is like drgregstewart.com. It's like just DR without the period, right? drgregstewart.com is just go there, and I have, podcasts, and both my books are right there, and it'll have links to Amazon. But that's where you go. Or you can look up I3 book on Amazon, or I3 for couples, at Amazon. So different ways, but drgregstewart.com, man.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate you, brother. Again, good timing. I am glad to have you on the show. To God be the glory, and we are out.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you for watching or listening to this show. If you are someone who listens to us on the podcast apps, please go to our Rumble channel. Even if you're not going to watch us there, we'd appreciate you hitting subscribe. We want to boost those numbers up and make sure that channel continues to grow. But again, thank you so much for listening to us.